Hey folks, I'm Will Jarvis. Along with my dad, Dr. David Jarvis, I host the podcast Narratives. Narratives is a project exploring the ways in which the world is better than it has been, the ways it is worse, and the paths toward making a better, more definite future. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, hey folks, back in Wake Forest, North Carolina tonight, Raleigh area, with Quinn. Quinn, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good.
We're back on the front porch again. It's kind of nice, masked up, just kind of socially distanced. Thought we would record an episode, kind of get to see each other, get out of the house for a little bit. It'd be a nice thing to do. And we want to talk a little bit about Whig history and decadence, and what these two concepts are, and how they're different, why they're important, and kind of what they're explaining about the world. So I guess just to kick it off, what's Whig history? I think that's a good place to start.
Well, I think there's a defensible and an indefensible version. And the defensible version starts with the observation that a lot of our objective metrics are getting better. Few babies starve to death than did starve to death before. And there's not a whole lot of doubt that babies starving to death is bad.
Right.
There's not much controversy about
Most
that.
people agree with that.
And so at least if you're focusing on the metrics which are getting better, which do seem like important things, you can argue that things seem to be getting better on the whole. And I think the indefensible version is we just touched on Hegel.
Yeah.
And Hegel believed that there was sort of underlying cosmic progress for reasons that were essentially mystical. That the world was moving toward purer and purer manifestations of the absolute idea.
Interesting.
And that is I think that's very, very difficult to argue. And I think very few people explicitly believe that. But I think a lot of people, on some level, do believe that there is a cosmic law, that things are getting better, and that everything is getting better, so they don't have the sense that, I should look at this statistic and see if it's actually improving.
Interesting. So Hegel had this idea that we're just improving toward this, good thing, immaterial good thing in the future.
Pure thought, thinking about pure thought, is how Russell summarizes Hegel's absolute. But I think Hegel is the archetypal example. He's the one I use when I'm talking to my mom, for instance, of somebody who's communicating badly, because if they were communicating well, they would be less convincing.
Yes. There's a lot of cases of that,
especially
in academia.
Yeah.
Especially in German philosophy,
yeah.
shall we say. It seems like to be a bit of a common theme.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. So, on its face, Whig history, things seem to be getting better from a utilitarian perspective.
Yeah.
Less starving, less people in extreme poverty.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there seems to be all these problems.
Yes.
And so I guess against Whig history, there's the decadence kind of argument.
Yes.
So that's kind of Ross Douthat coined the term.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did actually. So decadence, he coined the term. Can you describe kind of decadence, what it is, and maybe why it's important?
I think more the opposite view, that history is sloping downward.
Got it.
We are losing useful social technology. And I have some ideas for plausible mechanisms why that might be happening.
Got it. And what's an example of social technology, just for the listener?
Well, I would say representative democracy. That's a thing we know how to do, and it has certain advantages. For one thing, it seems to stabilize succession, so you don't have to go to war each time the government turns over. Which is nice. Yeah. I think manners probably are also social technology. Sometimes they're obsolete or vestigial, but a lot of the times they serve a purpose.
Got it. Would this be, I've got an example I want to throw out,
I would like that.
I want to see what you think about it. And we may have talked about it before, so excuse me if we have. But they do this study to try and measure social trust and drop wallets
Yeah.
off in different societies in
Yeah.
different big cities across the world.
Yeah.
And you see, and there's like $100 in the wallet. I don't know
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact exact criteria, but they drop them off. They'll drop like 100 wallets off in each city, and they see, and there's a phone number in there, and there's a card contact, and they see how many of the wallets get returned,
Yeah.
and how many of the wallets get returned with cash.
Yeah.
So perhaps like a really good society would be one where the wallet always gets returned with the
Yeah.
cash. One of the really interesting findings, this is just a side note, is that one of the worst places in the world to get your wallet back at all or with cash in it was actually the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
On your face, you think it would be like some really poor place in,
Yeah.
the developing world, like in Latin America
Yes.
or perhaps Africa or the Indian subcontinent. But no, it was actually in China, which is interesting, even in cities like Shanghai.
Yeah. I'm not good at geography. Is that very developed, or?
Quite developed, I would say. It looks like New York City.
I was wondering, because I'm betting one of the things that correlates with returning the wallet
Yeah.
is reputational systems and social systems.
Interesting.
I think people get used to, I think it's not just conscious calculation. If you live in an environment where your reputation is an asset and people know you and you're not really atomized, then
Interesting.
doing the right thing is a strategy that pays off again and again and again, because people can see that you're a good person, and so they cooperate with you. And
Oh, interesting. So maybe like if you're in a small town, you're more likely to cooperate
Yeah.
because there's more likely to be a repeated game
Yeah.
than if it's just like one-off you're in a big city.
yeah, you could see returning the wallet as trying to decide between the money and the reputational capital. And you
Right.
can't get as much reputational capital out of it in a place where people don't know who you are.
Interesting.
I don't think people are actually that cynical consciously.
Right,
And I
right.
think that,
But there could be some unconscious
Yeah.
process that works in that way too. That's really interesting. So that's a good example of social technology. Maybe do you return your shopping cart or not? That
Yeah.
feels like a
Yeah.
good metric. Or even norms around like lining up for things
yes.
seems to be. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, that was a complete tangent.
No.
So social technology seems to be getting worse, going the wrong direction.
Yeah, at least some of it is. I want to be as skeptical of a universal decadence view as I would be of a universal progress view. But yeah, we are losing some stuff, and it's potentially, and it's valuable stuff. I have some baggage about this. I feel
Yeah.
like 90% of the people I talk to about this are either committed to the view that things are getting worse, and they brush off the infant mortality stuff, which
Right.
is significant.
Yes.
Or they're committed to the fact that things are getting better, and they brush off social trust or self-determination, or this sense that lots of people obviously have that very deeply felt that things are getting worse. And I think both of those are significant enough that part of me is always kind of trying to anticipate which way you're going, and to be ready to say, but wait, there are dead babies, or but wait, there is an enemy and suicide, and
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I often wonder what I've come to think is that, and I'm not super confident about this, but it's something like things are getting better. Like there's less
Yeah.
people in poverty, and that trend is continuing. But I think at the same time, in the quote unquote developed world,
yeah,
things are either getting better more slowly, or they're only getting better at the top and they're getting worse or staying the same
Yeah.
in the middle and bottom, if that makes sense.
cost disease and
Yeah.
stagnation.
Definitely.
Ah.
Our friend Scott Alexander, we should mention cost disease.
Yes,
I think it's really good. And then mention, Scott came back yesterday
He
on
did.
this day of recording. Scott
That-
Alexander.
I had the thought that it was going to put me more in the Whig history camp, because
Yeah.
things are obviously getting better because Scott came back.
That's exactly there. It's settled. We're done. Why are we?
Yeah.
We don't need to talk anymore. We fixed it. No, we solved it all. So cost disease.
Yeah.
Can you describe what cost disease is?
I think the original idea is an economist named Baumol. Or
Yeah,
Baumol?
I'm not sure how you
to
pronounce it, but that's his name.
who was trying to explain why wages generally rose when we made technological improvements. Like, why should improvements in factory technology raise the wages of people who play violin professionally?
Right.
And his solution was that you have to pay them not to leave to become a factory worker.
Got it.
And so even though they're not producing more than they were before, or not necessarily producing more than they were before, their bargaining position has changed. And on its face, this seems like maybe a good thing,
Right.
in that productivity enhancements get shared throughout the economy.
Got it.
I mean, if we imagine the world without that kind of effect, some jobs would just not be worth doing. You'd still be making subsistence-level wages at them.
Right. That makes sense. And I guess your point about so let's say we want to go see someone play the violin at a concert. Can't do that right now, but say we wanted to. Or actually, a couple miles from here, I saw Lang Lang play.
Yeah.
He's a really famous Chinese piano player at Mandy Concert Hall. And his wages, but not his wages. It's hard for him to be more, get efficiency gains.
Yeah.
Because he can only play so many concerts a night. You know, there's a fixed, and once but you can make gains in other areas. And so maybe there's some areas where it's like, a doctor can only see X amount of people a day, and you can make these small improvements, but there are absolute productivity gains. Like once you reach them, it's impossible to up-level that.
Indirect improvements. If the doctor can see 10 people a day, but those 10 people have shifted from being people who are able to produce 10 widgets an hour to people who are able to produce 150 widgets an hour,
right.
And he saves one life of those 10 people. Probably not that much, but then the doctor has indirectly caused there to be way more widgets than he would have beforehand, even though he's still seeing the same number of people.
Definitely. So we've got cost disease here.
Yes.
I think the main point about cost disease is that essential goods have gotten more. So we could look at inflation chart, and we've got TVs are getting cheaper, and a lot of consumer goods, but then essential goods are getting more expensive.
Yes. This is Scott Alexander's point. He wrote a very, very, very good essay about it, and it looks like very essential things you need to live, like housing. It seems like not food, but housing and medical care and education that you need for your job is getting more expensive. And tell me if you think I'm misinterpreting this, but I've read the essay 2 or 3 times, and I think no one really knows why. He throws around 4 or 5 theories, but none of them are actually strong enough to explain the effect.
That's the sense I get, and I almost wonder. I know Tabarrok wrote a book on this, which I have not read yet. And I think he may have reviewed Scott may have reviewed the book, but it seems to me the more it's almost impossible to tell why, and it almost doesn't matter why. Just more than anything else, it matters that it's happening, and we have to find some way to fix it, right?
Yeah.
But so the essential goods you just talked about, where they're rising faster than inflation, it's so housing prices, that could be due to let's go through each one, maybe throw out a few reasons why it might be the cost may be growing faster than inflation. It's like housing, zoning regulations. You can't build new housing, kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard. And then there's healthcare. It's unclear what's going on in healthcare. And then education. That's the other area. Maybe it's subsidies have some effect, but there's a lot of...
Yeah. I also read Eliezer Yudkowsky, who writes about this stuff, and he says that subsidizing a good can only ever have beneficial effects if it causes more of the good to be produced. And if it doesn't, it will raise the price. And so screw over all the people who aren't getting the subsidy.
Got it.
And so he says... I think he uses education as an example. He says in the early 20th century, we built many more universities. We subsidized the universities, and that caused there to be many more than there had been. And in the late 20th, or maybe the early 21st century, recently, we tried that again, and it caused university prices to rise, but it didn't cause more to be built. And so something has changed that keeps us from building more universities, and that keeps that subsidy from causing it to be more affordable and to actually contribute to making it less affordable.
Right. That's really interesting. It does seem like there hasn't been a prestigious university built since 1900.
Yeah.
Like Stanford feels like the last one.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like even Duke, James B. Duke gave all the money to Trinity College, and
yeah.
I don't know. There seems like to be some cap. I don't know.
Yes.
The stagnation is strong in this one.
Yeah, it is. And, I mean, it's stronger if you take into account population. Like, the argument that made me, that made this dawn on me was about writers. So sort of different. But, yeah, Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Shakespeare is great.
Yeah.
Macbeth is great. Shakespeare has a reputation for being great, so probably there would be enough inertia that people would keep saying he was great even if he wasn't great. But I've read him and he's great. Our population is, I don't know how many times that of Elizabethan England, but it's a lot.
A lot more.
There ought to be 4 or 5 people as good as Shakespeare.
Right.
And as far as I can tell, there aren't. And that seems very surprising, and it seems like a fairly strong argument in favor of the decadence thesis, that with the increased population, we should be seeing more people doing great things for just about any category of great things that hasn't become obsolete.
That makes sense. Because I guess for any activity, we've got exactly. There should be more, if you have a normal distribution of people, there are going to be, and you increase the number of people,
yes,
there's going to be more people that, are off on these tail ends.
Yes.
But that's very bizarre, right? It's very bizarre that it's not happening.
It is. I mean, our go-to example of a great writer is from Elizabethan England.
That's very odd.
Yeah, it is.
So, I guess, and these questions are, let's just take the Shakespeare case, because I think that's a good case. And this may be a useless exercise, because I think this is wise over determined. But, what do you think went wrong? Like, why do you think we don't have, let's just, even in art, like, why do you think there's just, why is it bereft of these great works?
Well, I think there's a thesis that I run into sometimes on the internet, but I don't know if I understand it well enough to articulate it.
Yeah.
But it seems to suggest that most of the institutions we have dedicated toward directing resources toward artists,
right,
are mostly neglecting people with the talent to produce beautiful things, or insightful things, or truthful things, in order to play signaling games. So if you compare modern art to older art, it's I'm sure some of the modern art is very nice, but with a lot of it, it's hard to see the point of it. And I don't have this sense it seems like just about every time I run across a really beautiful painting on the internet, and I Google the artist, he's from 100 years ago.
Right.
I just discovered Wyndham Lewis, who I gather wrote very controversial stuff that I'm not very interested in reading. But all of his paintings are gorgeous.
Yeah.
They're just gorgeous. And I feel like I could have predicted before I looked up who this guy was that, he wasn't going to be, he lives in San Francisco now.
Yeah.
He's a historical figure.
He's definitely a historical figure. Which is very bizarre.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre to think we've gotten worse off at doing that.
It is. So I think the culture has something to do with it. I think, I have a pet theory that institutionalization has something to do with it. I guess maybe it's not a pet theory now, because I've seen some other people saying stuff like that. But I was reading Bertrand Russell, because I like Bertrand Russell, talking about the Royal Society. And it's basically this group of friends who, they fart around, they play games, and one of the game is who can make the best predictions. And
interesting.
boom, you have science.
Right.
And it seems like a lot of that early science, it's done by people who love it. It's not incentivized, and it's not institutionalized, so you don't have Goodhart's law type issues, or Parnell's law, where the people who are motivated by power get control of the bureaucracy, because there isn't bureaucracy.
That's a great point. And I wonder, to what extent, so talked to Don Braven yesterday, recently, and he's 85-year-old, and he had his book Scientific Freedom republished by Strike Press, and he has this idea that essentially what you need to do is you need to find people that can make breakthroughs in basic research, and you just give them money and you just leave them be, and I wonder to what extent have we just like. That doesn't happen in all these different fields, right? You just don't get a small chunk of money. You can just go out and just be creative and do things and it's counterintuitive to me, because I feel like a lot of the problems we have a lot of problems with coordination problems now.
Yes.
So the vaccine, and so we're really bad at coordination. But it seems like maybe what's going wrong is that we've gotten good at we think coordination is more important than it is in some areas, and then don't worry about it in other areas. So we want accountability in science and creative pursuits.
I think we often overestimate our ability to do it, and so we try to do it, and it ends up worse than not trying to do it. But it's because we're not. I think a lot of this. I don't want to be reductive, but I think a huge part of this is goal specification. We can't specify what exactly we want, so we specify a proxy, and we think the proxy is what we want, and then we get much more capable. Our civilization gets much more power, and we pour that power into the proxy, and it becomes very unlike what we actually want.
Interesting.
So bureaucracies select for people who are good at playing politics.
Right.
And it's really hard to stop them from doing that.
Right.
But you need bureaucracy to coordinate a lot of different people.
Definitely.
And so I think partly we're overestimating how much adding bureaucracy actually helps, and how careful you have to be in setting it out, and how fragile it is when you get one that actually functions.
I think that's a good point. It's super underrated. We talked to V. There's constant entropy in bureaucracies, and they, like you said, I think it's there's a real art to setting them up and keeping them accountable. Yeah. It's very difficult to do, and people perhaps underrate how difficult it is.
Yeah.
You reminded me about the artists. Just a side note, I see the proliferation of MFA programs.
Yeah.
Like Tisch School of the Arts. They're everywhere now. And I often wonder, it's if you really want to become an artist, shouldn't you do kind of what Thoreau did, and you just go to a cabin in the woods and you just write a book?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Maybe that's the real answer. And things just have gotten weird, right? I don't know. You don't need someone to teach you how to do it. And in fact, the act of going to get taught is perhaps counterproductive.
Yeah. Well, at least the way we're teaching it now. I think our teaching paradigms I think they've fallen victim to this. It's very hard to test for genuine knowledge. It's easy to test for regurgitation. The best processes for getting people good at regurgitating stuff destroy the capacity for genuine knowledge. They blank out understanding. Our educational systems have kind of gone whole hog on this.
That's a good point. To elaborate on that, they teach you to copy things,
yes,
and not create new things. But it's very can you even teach people to create new things? That's a real question.
Yes,
I don't know.
There's a pattern that I recognize, which is we assume that something is easy and we know how to do it.
Yeah, and
then when some of us realize that it's not and we don't, we start saying it's impossible. And my Eric Yudkowsky would say, well, have you tried for 5 minutes?
Right.
Actually tried for 5 minutes to think of a way to do this?
Right.
Yeah.
So this reminds me, I'm reading this great book, and I'll have to do a podcast on this. It's called Now It Can Be Told. It's
Yeah.
by General Groves, who ran the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
Which, fun side note, by the way, is it was actually going to be called the Knoxville Project, but for political reasons, got changed to Manhattan. I'm a big East Tennessee fan. That's why I mentioned that. But it's incredible how he's describing in the beginning how he's talking to scientists, and he's completely non-technical, and he would like tell you that, and he's like, well, you know, we didn't really know that we could do it.
Yeah.
But we thought, you know, we probably could do it, and we would figure out a way to get it done. And we're just going to set up all the infrastructure we think we need now.
Yeah.
You know, he's talking about setting up heavy water plants, which he actually ended up not needing. But it's like, just in case, you know. So they thought through everything. It seems like people avoid doing that process of actually thinking through, like, is this feasible? Is this something people would want? I don't know. All these different areas.
I think so, yeah. It's interesting. I think. Oh, it is interesting.
Yeah.
My mom's from Tennessee.
Oh, really?
I don't
Where?
actually know where.
Gotcha.
Except, no, I don't actually know where.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, you know, what's gone wrong is difficult, but I think, like we've just talked about, it's difficult to ascertain exactly what's going wrong. But I do wonder, you know, what are the paths? So we've talked about Decadence. We've talked about Whig history. I think both of us perhaps have a sense that, you know, the numbers are getting better, but there's also real stagnation that's going on.
I think, I'm I hear it attributed to Luke Keep, who's a blogger whose work I find fascinating, but I never feel like I understand it.
Gotcha. It's not like Hegel, is it?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
That's important.
But, which is that, the division is between legible and illegible. That we're good at improving legible metrics. That we're bad at improving illegible metrics.
That's really good.
That the illegible metrics get sacrificed when we improve the legible metrics.
Got it. That's really interesting. So maybe we've gotten really good at just like, well, that's not true. We've also gotten bad at doing legible things like vaccine distribution.
Yes.
But you know, in some areas of our society, we're good at like legible things.
Yes.
Like,
we are. The vaccine stuff is disturbing. I mean, I feel like it represents a progression in some sense, or a visible progression. So maybe it's a lacking indicator of things that should have worried us 10 years ago.
Right. That's a good point. Just our general inability to do just about anything.
Yeah.
Just continues apace. And with few ways out of it, it seems like.
Yeah.
Which is...
Partly, I think the world is getting... I've thought that, and it's a judgment call, but I do think the world is getting stranger. I think it's getting less like the ancestral environment. And so our default heuristics are malfunctioning more and more badly.
Interesting.
Which I think is one of the sources of this.
Do you think, in what sense? Do you think it's like we're more atomized, we're more...
Yeah, with more population.
More people?
And in some sense, more connected almost. It used to be your peer group were the people who lived near you, and they had the same information diet. So it's partly less that we're atomized and more that we have different and incompatible sets of connections.
That's a good point. While being stuck together.
Yeah. We're in different media bubbles.
Right.
And, I don't know, it's complicated. I think, we're trying to do big things that involve coordinating lots of people.
Right.
And I think we have a set of intuitions about that honestly, a lot of things sort of fell into place. And I don't know if this is... I'm not a professional.
Yeah.
And this is one of those areas where people will say to you in an accusatory voice, you're not a professional. But if you read about the ancestral environment, you have little groups of people under Dunbar's number who have known each other all their lives,
Right.
who are going to know each other all their lives, and so many things fall into place. Reputation systems are everything. Revenge makes sense because people will see that you took revenge, and so they won't harm you.
Right.
That's a sensible investment, And coordination tech makes sense. We have this intuition that if we bring the tribe together and all agree that X is a problem, then X will get solved. Which makes sense when everyone is watching each other all the time.
Right. Exactly.
And we have the sense that, well, by golly, if that doesn't work, we will assign someone to do X, and that will fix it.
Right.
And actually, what that means in the modern world is giving someone the title of being the X solver,
Right.
and then trying to specify the goal well enough that they solve that and not a proxy. And that's really, really hard, but we don't realize that it's hard. We expect it to be automatic.
That's a great point. So, like, the separation of, and this is on moving up a different level, but the separation of responsibility and, I guess, like, responsibility and, like, the benefit of, like, having a title. How would you put this? Like, so, like, I'm thinking about in the case of this is a good case. I think everyone knows about this. The Trump administration, they decided, we don't want to we don't want the responsibility of dealing with COVID, so we're going to just hand this response over to the states.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And it's like, so they want the status of having taken care of COVID
Yes.
without the actual responsibility of taking care of it, and then we end up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many failures down the chain, like, but
Yeah.
just this specific example.
Yeah. So they put it on the states.
That's right.
And the states have coordination problems.
Right.
And they're bureaucracies.
Yep.
You're going to get sick of hearing me say that, but I do think it's key.
Yeah, it's very important.
And so it doesn't work very well. I'm not totally sure where you're going with this, to be honest.
Just, I think the separation of the problems that happen when you get status and what's the word? You can get the status without the responsibility.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to say.
There's a blog post by, I think she blogs under Elizabeth, which is not a very Googleable name, but it's called Power Buys You Distance from the Crime.
Oh, interesting.
And the idea is that one of the things people use status and power for is insulation from responsibility. And so you actually get a negative correlation between people's ability to be responsible for stuff and their ability to make bad stuff happen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I wonder what happens when that effect spreads out kind of across our society, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we end up where we are now.
Yeah. It's a whole tangle of tricky problems.
Yes. And even enumerating them is like a tall task.
Yep.
Where was I? Where's my brain going? That's a great question. I want to talk a little bit about so we've talked about Decadence, we've talked about Whig history, and perhaps some pathways out of Decadence per se. I know. So Ross Douthat ends his book, and it's like, until we get the warp drive or whatever, we're in trouble. Which seems like a kind of a cop out. Specifically, let's look at art again. I think that's a great place to be. Are we just doomed to, Marvel and Star Wars, every year,
Yes.
Until civilization collapses? I don't know.
Star Wars is getting worse, I think, on a
Yes.
civilizational scale anyway.
Yes, exactly. And like, where's the new? The problem doesn't seem to me that we don't have enough Star Wars. Is that we don't have enough Star Wars in the sense that we
Yes.
don't have new media that is actually new.
Yes.
It's just like rehashing old things until.
And the rehashings are getting worse. It doesn't fit as neatly into Marvel, but I love the Batman comic books.
Yeah.
And I don't love any of the movies. And
Oh, really? None of the Dark Knight stuff?
I really like their portrayal of the Joker, but there are some structural elements they're missing there. Personally, I love derivative works. I love the kind of creativity that comes from remixing something that's already existent.
Gotcha.
But the new ones feel more and more stale. I don't want to... You could do a whole podcast just about this, but a big part of the problem with the Dark Knight stuff is that they allow the viewer to see Batman's decision to dress up like a giant flying animal and punch muggers as a rational response to crime. And one of the key things that all the really good Batman comics have in common is the acknowledgement on some level that it isn't. That you need something... That's what makes him a psychologically interesting character. And it's what makes them powerful as art in a way that I don't think a mainstream superhero movie has been. They don't feel safe. They feel, they don't feel sterilized. They feel right on the border of being actual horror.
Interesting.
And in the context of that dynamic, his relationship with the Joker is interesting. Jungian is the word I keep coming down to because that's the level of analysis that I think makes sense for it. And so I do kind of want to... The way this ties back is that the comic books I loved were derivative works. They were based on the character who was created in the 1930s.
Yeah.
But they were good derivative works. And I don't think the current stuff is on anything like the same level.
Interesting.
I don't know. It's something...
Just gets worn out.
Yeah.
After a while. Yeah, that's really interesting. So perhaps you can ride the tailwinds for a while, but eventually,
Also, I feel like the status of stuff changed. The comic books from the 30s were made to be disposable. They were fun for children. And then a bunch of people, Frank Miller, Alan Moore, came along in the 80s and said, okay, let's do serious art based on this. Yeah. And it was great.
Yeah.
And now we are making blockbuster movies, and they are not serious art, and they are not great. They're okay. If you want to enjoy them, you can enjoy them. I don't want to knock people for enjoying them.
Yeah.
But it's almost like but it feels like that transition matters. Now you can't do anything too scary with the character because he's $1 billion property or $1 million property.
So perhaps you get constrained because you have to serve everyone.
Yeah. Your target audience is broader.
Right.
The work gets less specific.
And then less things you can do. That's really interesting. I wonder, are people as artists now reaching too broadly? Like, are they trained to reach too broadly and they don't focus enough on their own super bizarre and interesting the things they're interested in?
Yeah. The internet would do that. And the feedback cycles. You get likes very quickly for doing stuff that appeals to most people.
Interesting.
Fewer people working in the woods.
Right. Perhaps that feeds into it.
Yeah.
So perhaps we can run back to Whig history for a bit. It does seem like there has been a great... there's been quite the recognition that it's somewhat run out, particularly in the last, 5 years, I would say. Like, I think you could, there's like the end of history, Fukuyama, who in Fukuyama claims, like, that's not exactly what I said, but, and probably isn't exactly what he said. But it does seem like things have really devolved and there's more recognition that there are real problems going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, I don't think there are many serious people that acknowledge that everything's going super in all facets.
Yep.
But I could be wrong about that. I don't know.
No, I don't think you're wrong about that. I mean, I can't think of any.
And this does remind me, like, you've got there's a lot of and on that same front, aligned with that, is that there's a lot of liberal democracy, not anti, but like, my favorite is like, it's Palladium. It's like, what's next after liberalism?
Yeah.
And I keep going back and forth on this, but I'm fair. I'm at the end of the day, I'm like kind of a Dietrich McCloskey liberal, and I feel like everyone who's making critiques, all the smart people that make critiques, have not spent enough time looking at the alternatives.
Yeah, I think
perhaps.
we're in the same boat there. I haven't read McCloskey. I know by reputation.
Oh, she's great.
I do hear great things. A lot of it feels like noticing that the complicated machine is producing some bad outcomes and jumping pretty quickly to smashing it with a hammer.
Right.
Which leads us to simpler outcomes that I think are mostly worse.
Yeah.
You almost get a little bit of a sense of... Nietzsche he was talking about value systems, but he distinguishes, I think, between regressing to simpler sets of values and creating more complicated sets of values based on your existing set of values. And that feels relevant, at least as an analogy. That, after liberalism, well, we could try feudalism again. We know that's a very high entropy system. There's a lot of attraction toward there.
Yeah.
Or we could try something weird and new and complicated that we haven't thought of yet.
Right.
And one of those sounds about 1 billion times more interesting than the other.
Right. But the real challenge seems to be, coming up with what that is. Yeah. It has to be something that's achievable, that is, it seems so complex, and it's just not something I've seen in the cultural milieu. Like, everyone's talking about this stuff. So I don't know, like, everyone's exploring, what comes next, what do we replace it with? But I think, it's good to look and always, it's always good to look. But I guess my point would be it's probably good to be careful about blowing things up until you have something better, perhaps.
Yes. Very big fan of that sentiment.
Yeah.
As David Friedman puts it, revolution is the hell of it.
Right.
I think he's riffing on revolution for the hell of it, which was
That's awesome. That's well put. But I do think these critiques, they are strong, and how things are progressing and how they're not progressing.
Yes.
And I think they're becoming almost more true. And that is disturbing to me, because it is somewhat of a forcing function for the revolution, like you said, right? Like, as things get generally worse, alternatives seem to look better and better, even if they're not well thought through. And I don't think this is like a rational process where we all sit around.
No.
Like, we don't sit around the round table and all, like, come to like this conclusion together about what we should do.
Yes.
It's like super messy and bad. And it's like you sent me the essay by Bertrand Russell about, what was it titled? I was reading it last night.
Ideas that have helped mankind.
And ideas that have hurt mankind.
Yeah.
And in the ideas that have hurt mankind, there was one line which I highlighted on my Kindle, which I don't have with me, but it was something like, you wouldn't believe how, just a few short years ago, people in Portugal, he was describing this incident where people were really mad that they had strangled someone before they burned them at the stake. It was during the Portuguese Inquisition, I believe. And because they didn't get to see them writhe in agony as they passed. And it's like, oh my God, like, we've replaced some of that with like video games, right? Which is really good.
Yes,
but a really positive development. But like there's parts of human nature which are just like very complex and disturbing and dark, and like everything has to be modeled with that in mind.
Yes, it does. Martin Geary, I started reading his book.
Oh yeah,
Revolt of the Public.
Oh, how is it?
It was okay. I only started it. I think I have the sense that I get the point.
Gotcha.
Already, but several times I've had that sense about a book, and then I've read it, and I've been like, wow, I didn't get the point.
Right.
But as I understand the point, the idea is the internet has connected people in a way that unlocks a lot of populist energy, because a lot of people can coordinate now. Coordination is much cheaper.
Right.
But the thing that unites the most people is negation. It's tear it down. Building it up, people have different conflicting visions of it. And so we're seeing a lot of energy put toward purely negative ideas.
Right.
We see hate mobs. We don't see love mobs. We don't see mobs coming together to build stuff, because that requires more complex coordination.
Right.
Twitter enables a shift in our ability to smash things.
That's a good point.
It makes it, because coordination is easier around destruction.
Well, and even if you can even hear that, like, listening to the inauguration and it was a unity speech.
Yeah.
But even then, the applause lines in a political speech are always the ones where you're like scoring points.
Yeah.
Against some like political enemy.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is important to remember. Like, you're right. Like, you can't sell unity or coming together to build something up. Like, I think the only way, two large groups of people. I think you can sell it to very small groups of people, and that's how you can actually move the needle.
Yes.
But I think that's important to keep in mind. You can only, it's the only thing that sells to large groups of people coordinating is taking things apart.
Yes. Benjamin Hoffman talks about scapegoat rituals.
Oh, yeah?
How a large group of people might coordinate to extract resources from an individual.
Oh,
if an
interesting.
individual stuck out as a target, but they have no reason to coordinate to bestow resources upon an individual.
Right.
And so we see certain equilibria where anything that makes you stick out is bad. And Scott Alexander's in the post he put out like yesterday, I think, he talks about the pressure not to blog if you're working as a psychiatrist or a cop, and it's difficult to rationalize that.
That's a really good point. And what, again, why is always really difficult. Yes. But perhaps, do you have any thoughts around why it seems like things have gotten so, like, what's the word? There's immense pressure to conform.
Yes.
In, like, all walks of life, it almost seems like.
I think I do have some thoughts on... Hold on, I saved it.
Oh, perfect.
Let me pull out the quote.
Awesome.
Scott writes, talking about the pressure not to blog.
Yeah.
I got emails that were like that, only it was grad students. Apparently, if you have a blog about your field, that can make it harder to get or keep a job in academia. Let's pause. And if you write about your intellectual subject, it's harder to get or keep a job in the portion of our society that's dedicated toward disseminating knowledge about that intellectual subject. I'm not sure what we think we're gaining by ensuring the smartest and best educated people around aren't able to talk openly about the fields they're experts in, but I hope it's worth it. And I wrote a thread about possible explanations. Benjamin Hoffman says, in zero-sum games, majoritarian decision rules, such as democracy, create an asymmetry. It's much easier to expropriate from a minority than from a majority, or easier to transfer wealth to a majority than to a minority. Why would the majority vote for something they don't all benefit from? A simple variant of this is the Survivor game, in which a single player is voted off the island at a time. Since there's comparatively little advantage to being singled out for good, players will tend to want to avoid revealing information about themselves or their allies. Loudly voicing consensus opinion in ways that don't specify the implications for any person is fine because it's not informative, but anything that lets people distinguish you from the others is dangerous.
Oh, interesting.
He's just an incredible essayist, and I feel like I think that's where a lot of it is coming from. Non-conformity makes you stick out, makes you a potential shelling point, makes you a target, and destructive energy is easier than creative energy. So you're mostly on the lookout for destructive energy. And this ties into Zvi Maushowitz asymmetric justice. You can get punished, you can get blamed for unforeseen bad consequences of your actions, but you can't get rewarded for unforeseen good consequences.
Right.
And so there's selective pressure against doing anything.
Definitely. And you see this all the time in the FDA's classic example, I would say.
Yeah.
You don't get... And like the vaccine roulette, right? So you don't get any points for the people you save. You only get points for the 1 in 100,000 people that... Negative points for the 1 in 100,000 people who get Guillain-Barré from the vaccine. So they, of course, they take their time. They let, just 200,000 people, Quinn, die from COVID. While they make sure that, no one's going to get Guillain-Barré from the vaccine.
Yeah.
But it leads to just so much outcomes that are much worse. Do you think there's anything with our legal system that plays into this? It does seem to be like doing things. It's like the trolley problem, right? So if you threw the switch in the trolley problem,
yes,
you would be held liable.
Yes.
Whereas if you let more people die and you didn't do anything,
I think our
you
legal system makes it significantly worse. It's a hard problem.
Yeah.
I don't love our legal system. I have a grudge against it because it doesn't live up to my ideals, and when I was a child I thought it did, and learning that was unpleasant.
Yeah. It's always bad when your heroes are villains.
But yeah, it makes it easier. I think there are tweaks we could do, but the underlying problem is very difficult. We can't punishing people for inaction tends not to go well.
Right.
And there is a fear, and I think it's a legitimate fear. I think it's kind of an unthinking fear sometimes, but I think if you think about it, you'll be scared of it after you think about it too.
Yeah.
That if we say, okay, you can kill people if you have to save people, then you've opened the door to all kinds of rationalizations, and humans are very good at coming up with rationalizations. And you've damaged common knowledge that people won't kill you for the greater good.
That's a good point. So perhaps it's something like, well, what could start happening is, Quinn, we're operating on you for some unknown reason.
Yeah.
And we're like, wow, we realize, man, Will's over here, and 3 of Will's friends are here, and man, if we take all of Quinn's organs out, we can save all of them. That'd be great, and that's 4 people.
Yes. We need... that's the surgeon variant on the trolley problem.
Right.
And one of the, I think, traditional responses to it is that society needs us to be able to trust that that's not going to happen. That we lose more from, just in a purely utilitarian sense, you lose more from people being worried about that happening and never getting surgery in case it happens than you gain from... Which I think is true, but... So I don't see how to... I haven't tried for 5 minutes to literally write laws that would let you throw the switch in the trolley problem but wouldn't let you take someone's organs out. But I don't trust people to actually enforce those laws.
Right.
I don't think I have mentioned on here. I usually say that there's this line about the law in its majestic equality punishes rich people and poor people equally for sleeping under bridges.
Right.
But realistically, I don't know. I think that was Proudhon, and he was French, and it was a long time ago. But in the society I live in, no, it doesn't. The laws, even if they're facially very unequal, are never enforced equally.
Right.
Sometimes the division isn't rich and poor, but there's almost always, I think the relevant division would be high versus low status.
Right.
And they get selectively enforced along that axis. People straight up pretend the law says something different than the actual words say if it lets them punish people they really want to punish.
Right. Which is a real problem. How do you manage that tribal intuition?
Yeah. But it does mean that, even if I could write a law that would let you throw the switch in the trolley problem but wouldn't allow for organ harvesting, I'm not sure I could trust that people would actually carry it out, even if I got the words perfect.
That's a good point. I've got a question for you about utilitarianism.
Yeah.
So, Will McCaskill, someone asked him this thought experiment, and he's kind of the leader of the effective altruism movement, or the modern kind of philosopher behind it. He wrote a book called Doing Good Better, which I really enjoyed. But he had this, I think he was too much of a hardliner on this, and I think he was a poor salesman for EA because of it. But someone asked him, okay, so Quinn, right across the street here, we've got 2 houses directly in front of us. On the left, there's $1 million in the house. That's yours. You can go get it. And on the right, there's a house. It's on fire. There's 2. Let's say there's 2 people inside. Say there are 2 children. How about that to make it even more vivid, shall we say? So we only have time to go in a house and get out the people, or get the money from the other house. So what you can do with the money? You can go and you can save, let's say, 1,000 lives with that.
Yes.
So do you go in and get the money, or do you go in and get the people?
Yes. It is an interesting question. I think, almost certainly the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
In real life. I'm not saying that normatively. I practice since I was young, the art of distinguishing what I should do from what I would do, and trying to predict what I would do. And I'm good at predicting what I would do, and what I should do is trickier.
Yeah.
I think part of the, I don't want to pretend there aren't irrational, visceral, kind of indefensible reasons for this.
Right.
But there are also some possibly overlooked defensible reasons that I think filter into it.
Yeah.
Benjamin Hoffman, who I wrote, he wrote a post called "A Drowning Child is Hard to Find."
Yeah.
He argued that altruists have greatly overestimated, in a way that seems sort of systematic, how cheap it is to actually save lives.
Oh,
because they want people to donate.
Oh, yeah?
So to some extent, the $1 million, you're trusting that your society will actually use that to do the thing it says it will do. And I think people don't have a visceral level of trust in that, and I think they shouldn't.
That's a really good point. So that's actually that's a really good point. That's like have you seen Tiger King? We may have talked about this.
I have.
Okay, so do you remember he has a section where he starts talking about nonprofits?
Yeah.
And I think this is the most, Joe saw the world most clearly when he talks about nonprofits. He's like, they're all scams. Essentially they, and all of them, that's a broad term, but, the vast majority of them are essentially scams that don't do what their stated purpose, what they set out to do. And so rationally, perhaps, like you said, if we look over there and, the $1 million in the house, it's like, well, the odds that actually goes to the right place are just so low.
Yeah.
Perhaps are we really all just closeted utilitarians?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think more than we seem to be. I think some of our moral intuitions make sense in that context, and more of them make sense as Scott has a post about this. They make sense as proxies that we've come to care about for themselves, but we originally cared about for utilitarian reasons.
Gotcha.
Like, fairness makes a lot of sense in the context of diminishing marginal utility.
Gotcha.
But I think people aren't subconsciously calculating diminishing marginal utility now when they care about fairness.
That makes sense.
Have you read, there's a wonderful blog post by Jessica Taylor called Active Charity?
No.
I'm going to send it to you. You're going to love it.
Oh,
It's
yeah?
about, she worked in a nonprofit, I think, and she writes about, act is the defining word.
Yeah?
I think it's hard to summarize the thesis of it. It's a dialogue, and but I think part of it is her claim that not only are the nonprofits scams, most people who donate to them know that they're scams on some level. And so we're in a sort of collaborative, symbiotic act where we pretend to fix these problems.
Oh, interesting. So they are aware.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if she's right, but it was a very eloquent, well-reasoned case, and I think she's more right than I thought she was before I read it. There's a guy on Twitter who told me once that we should sometimes think of communication as moving people marginally closer to the truth.
Got it.
Which was a big relief to me, because sometimes I say things I know are wrong, but I don't know how they're wrong, and they're the closest I can come to articulating how...
Right. So, I do want... This reminds me, Elephant in the Brain?
Yeah.
Robin Hanson book. So, we're talking about nonprofits, right? And so, most people give to nonprofits the signal that they care about other people, right? And most people buy health care, for their loved ones to signal they care about them. Even though, if you look at like the Rand Health study and like all these big meta-analysis, it turns out, healthcare, there are some interventions that do things. A lot of them don't. Most of it's just signaling. We just care about each other. We want to signal we care about each other. I wonder if people, the idea behind supposition of the book was that people are not aware of this.
Yeah.
Perhaps people are more aware of this than Robin and Kevin would give them credit for, right?
Yes.
Like, perhaps we know that, let's say, Quinn, you're sick, and of course, we're going to get you the best treatment in the world, you know what I mean? And, we know, the odds, it's not, it won't do anything, right? But, we want to feel better about ourselves.
Yes.
And we want to believe that someone would take care of us like that.
Yes.
And we know, we intuitively have that sense that it's true.
Yes.
I don't know.
I think one of the things that I've come to believe that I think most people don't believe, it's at least relevant here, is that there is a division. I'm modeling it as a bimodal distribution, but it might be more of a continuum. I do think it's a lumpy continuum between people who introspect, and so for them, I am not aware of this means I've looked for it and I can't find it, and people who habitually don't. They don't know why they do things. Right. They don't ask themselves why they do things. For them, I'm unaware of it is the default state.
Right.
And so it's not so much that it's hidden so much as they don't look.
Right. That's a good point. But maybe if you critically ask them and they sat down and thought about it, they'd probably come back to you and say, yes, I'm doing it because I want to signal to... And you gave them the terminology. They'd say, I'm giving this nonprofit to signal that I care about the poor animals in North Carolina.
I think you can find a lot of that stuff in awareness and through probing. I use imaginary counterfactuals a lot.
Yeah.
I use one routinely for do I believe this, where I get offered up to bet on it.
Right.
$1 million if I'm right. I lose a finger if I'm wrong. Losing a finger is visceral enough to make me actually care about the question.
Right.
$1 million is visceral enough not to make me bet against whatever makes me risk losing a finger.
Right. There's a bit of a heretical subtext to, I think, what we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes or so. It's that, and to some extent this whole show, it's that, yes, human minds are fallible in all these crazy ways, all the time. But, perhaps through critical thinking, sitting down and, figuring things out, we can get pretty close to the truth in different areas. I mean, it takes us, sitting down. I remember we had this problem at work I was working on, and it seemed insurmountable. And this has happened time and time again. But then we put it out in front of everybody, and we explicitly, walk through what the problem is. And time again, we're just able to come up with, solutions to these seemingly impossible or very unlikely to be able to be solved problems. And it's just we are able to reason through things, but we have to focus on it, and it's expensive and it takes time, and I don't know. Expensive as in mental energy wise.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And unintuitive.
That's
why
right.
Yudkowsky's It's Impossible. Have you thought about it for 5 minutes? Is so effective because they haven't.
Right,
and
exactly.
I don't think it always means that they don't care. I think it's an unintuitive that you can come up with solutions by thinking about things.
Right.
It's both unintuitive and sometimes it's hard to communicate to people because they'll rehearse their solutions for their excuses for why they can't find a solution rather than actually looking.
Right. Which is a real problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's a communication problem.
Yeah, it is. And it's an important one for our society to solve to kind of move forward. Well, Quinn.
Yeah.
I think my legs might fall off here.
Yeah. Which is good.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
Any parting shots? Anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We should think about doing this again.
Yeah, definitely. We will. We'll come up with another one and we'll have it back on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you too.
Well, that's our show for today. I'm Will Jarvis.
And I'm Will's dad.
Join us next week for more narratives.